Welcome back to another episode of Meet the Lawmaker. We are joined this week by Congressman Eric Sorensen, who represents Illinois' District 17. And Congressman, to kick off this interview, tell me a little bit more about District 17 and the types of agriculture that are in it.
Well, thank you for having me. Illinois 17 is a really diverse set of communities in northern, northwestern, and central Illinois, including Rockford, Moline Rock Island, Galesburg, Peoria, and Bloomington Normal. All of these very vibrant cities have one connection, and that connection, it's agriculture. Not only do I live in Moline, Illinois, that was John Deere's hometown. And not only was he the entrepreneur, but we're building the implements that our farmers are using today. And so we need to make sure that agriculture is resilient.
Now, do you come from a farming background yourself?
I grew up in the country. I grew up off of Blacktop Road, but where, I knew to look out for the combines in the fall, and also every time the wind blew, there was a corn stalk somewhere in our yard. But yeah, so it's always been a part of me, growing up in rural northern Illinois, that farming is important to us. Mm-hmm.
So before coming to Congress, you were a TV meteorologist. So how would you say that experience has helped prepare you for the work that you do today in Congress?
Right. I look back in the 22 years that I was on television as a meteorologist. First things first, I had the earpiece in my ear. Even though I was just in charge of communicating weather and meteorology, I was paying attention to what was going on in our communities because I was the number one consumer of our product of news because I was paying attention to it. And so having an understanding of what's going on around us, but then also being the communicator of complex issues, to be there when the tornado is ravaging through our hometowns. Or forecasting the river and the flood levels, to be that trusted voice that so many people got used to hearing from. It was very unique being a meteorologist. I never jumped around from TV station to TV station. I really worked for the better part of 20 years in the district that I now serve. And so I like to say that I didn't work for the TV station. Yeah, the TV station could sell the commercials before the weather came on. I worked for the people that were tuning in that needed the information that I could provide. Mm-hmm. And that was, based on science and data. It was about talking to my viewers over the years about climate. I was one that said, this shouldn't be a political issue. We should have meteorologists that understand the data and that are using science and then communicating that science. And it turns out for many years, the farmers were the ones that were paying attention because they were the ones that understood that things were changing, and I was the one that connected them to what they were seeing. And they were instrumental not only in getting me elected, but now I'm working for them, especially on the Agriculture Committee, on the Science Committee, to be able to say, hey, let's use data and values and science so that we're making good decisions so that you can hand your farm down to your kids and your grandkids. We need to make sure that this is sustainable for the future.
Would you say that climate debate was a big reason why you decided to run for Congress to kind of help be that spokesperson between the science and the consumer?
Yeah, when I hear the words climate debate, for me as a scientist, there is no debate. We shouldn't be debating this anymore. We should be talking about the things that make us resilient, the things that allow us to be conservationists, to understand what we need to do for the next generation. And for me, it's not only talking with farmers, but being the resource for other members of Congress on the other side of the aisle who say, how are you talking to, for instance, agriculture? How are you talking with farmers about climate for the past 15 years? How did you make it work, Eric? Or what does this mean? What does carbon sequestration mean? To be able to have these text messages from other members of Congress that I've met, it's really important that I got to Congress without having this background in politics, I had the background of this science. And I don't come to Congress with the political baggage that can get in the way of a lot of people.
So let's build off of your career in meteorology, and also you sit on the House Ag Committee now,
Right.
And it's a Farm Bill year. So tell me, what are some of your Farm Bill priorities that you have, and how are you going to use those priorities or work towards those priorities while sitting on the Ag Committee?
Well, having an understanding, being the meteorologist and understanding that we're seeing more of these extreme weather events, and they're happening more frequently. I was one that was on the air for about 4 hours the day that we had the derecho that moved through eastern Iowa and northwestern Illinois. Understanding that this was a storm that, personally, as a meteorologist, I didn't think that storm could exist. It was something that I wasn't thinking about until after it happened. But now, what is going to be our resilience after that storm? And we have to learn from that to say, how are we going to protect us from the next storm? Now, thankfully, that derecho happened in a time after the harvest, where the grain bins were solidly full. Otherwise, those grain bins would have been destroyed. But what if that happened, if a derecho like that happens in July before the harvest? Right? It's understanding, what do we need to do now in Congress to make sure that our farmers are viable, that their yields are not impacted. And so I'm here to focus on crop insurance, making sure that that's resilient. As we go forward into the future, we need to make sure that crop insurance is robust, so that if hypothetically you had a storm like that happen where there was a flood and ended with a drought, or if we had an early season snowfall in October, like we did back in 2019, to make sure that this doesn't decimate a crop and that our farmers are taken care of. That's the job of Congress, and that's the job of somebody who's representing Northwestern Illinois.
So let's build on that a little bit more. What types of climate-related policies or programs would you like to see in the Farm Bill?
I'm really focused on how we adapt to it. We need to make sure not only that we're doing right in our environment, and I think most, if not all, farmers and those in agriculture understand our place in conservation. But also, it's making sure that our farmers are resilient and sustainable into the future. So as we're growing the corn that is being fermented into alcohol, ethanol, which is going into our gas tanks, okay? Understanding that our transportation mode is going to change in the next generation, okay? How do we make our farmers resilient to the next generation? It's making sure that, I'm having the conversations here in this office with a company like Boeing. All right, so how do we make sure, as a congressman, how do I make sure that we're getting the standards of biofuels up so that Boeing is going to allow their airplanes to use biofuels? And I look at where our district is, uniquely situated a couple of hours to the west of O'Hare Airport, and we're going to need our farmers to produce the biofuels that aviation, as it becomes more sustainable, we're going to need the farmers to produce the biofuels. And so today, understanding that farmers are going to be the heroes in this by being sustainable, that is only going to happen if we look forward as opposed to looking backwards or look at just what we're doing today.
What do you believe needs to happen to get a bipartisan Farm Bill done on time?
Well, we have to understand what's at stake. We have to understand what is needed here. And we have to make sure that the cuts don't happen at the hands of the people that are trying to make ends meet today. I look at some of our smaller towns, like if you drive through Morrison, Illinois, or if you drive through Knoxville or Canton, Illinois. These are small farming communities that are having a tough time today. We need to make sure that we're investing in our smaller communities again. We need to make sure that that we're not cutting in a place that is going to be detrimental to the next generation. Understanding that, for instance, the Farm Bill largely encompasses how we eat, how our country is fed. We need to make sure that our kids especially have the food necessary so that they can go to school and learn, because they're going to be the next leaders. If we were to cut that and make food not sustainable, or people insecure with food, I wear that on my conscience. And so these are things that we've got to make sure that we're fighting for in the Farm Bill.
How are you working with your colleagues to bridge those conversations around cuts, and then still working, like how are you working across the aisle to get those votes for like the Farm Bill?
Right. Well, I'm lucky being in northwestern Illinois, that this is a district that is similar to many other districts, especially in the heartland. In the breadbasket. So it's talking with members that are on the other side of the river in eastern Iowa, making sure that we're coming up with solutions that benefit people, and that they don't just benefit a political party. It's personal to me because I represent my hometown. I represent the people. And so every time that I see political partisanship, when I see people being used as a political football, all I want to do is grab that football and just throw it right to the ground and say, listen, stop the game. Let's find the solutions that are going to affect the people.
Okay. You also have a seat on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee.
Right.
Are there any areas you think could overlap with your priorities there with the priorities from the Ag Committee?
Right, and it's so essential, as my background being the meteorologist, being the person that's communicating how the weather works, it's so essential to agriculture, right? Aside from the seed that you're putting in the ground, the weather is it is the most important thing, right? So being on ag, and then also being on science, being the ranking member on space, so that I can make sure that the appropriation is there for weather modeling technology, to make sure that satellite technology, it's not so much that I want to make sure that our farmers can look down at an acre of land. We're going to be able to look down to a couple of square feet of land. So when we talk about crop insurance, okay, as we strengthen crop insurance, what I'm also doing in the Science Committee is making sure that we're strengthening our ability for resilience so that we can look down onto a particular piece of land and understand that that is too wet, or that is too dry, or that what we're doing on that piece of land isn't working. Or that the yield could be better, or the yield is perfect, right? And that's where science is going to come in. It's also making sure that we're making the advancements in satellite technology so precision agriculture works. There are so many different intersection points between ag and science. It really makes me feel good because we're doing the most good being on those two committees.
Now, out of everything we've talked about thus far, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing the agriculture industry today?
Certainly we've got a labor shortage. Certainly we've got to make sure, and this is not just in the Midwest, we've got to make sure that that our immigration system works. We've got to make sure that we've got the farm workers that we need. We've got to look at changing weather. As our weather changes, for me, it's making sure that we're doing good by our farmers. For instance, as our climate is changing, it's understanding that we're being dealt from a different deck than from our parents and our grandparents. Talking to farmers, no longer can we call climate a hoax, because they're the ones that know. They know it's changing. Right? To take the politics out of it, to just say, hey, we've got somebody that's just looking at the science. And why do I think we need to take the politics out of it? It's because while you and I'm case example, I changed my career, right? From meteorology to now being in Congress. I don't want to say it was easy for me to do that. Because certainly running for Congress and being in Congress, this is the most difficult job I've ever had. But understanding that if you're a family farmer and you've been on the same land for generation after generation, and even with the technology and the innovation we have today, you can't make it work. Input costs are going up. Your yield is going down. You can't make it work today. We have too many farmers that quit their life. And we have to change that. I want to make sure that our mental health care is being taken care of. I want to make sure that our farmers are being taken care of. so that they can sit there on the front porch and see their kids and their grandkids planting in the field across the street.
What solutions do you have to kind of help take care of those farmers around mental health?
Well, I think it's largely something that has not been funded. And we've got a funding challenge in Congress today. It can't just be cut all the way across the board. That's not going to do us any good. We have to see where Congress, and Congress has the power of the purse. So where is Congress spending the money that is going to be the investment in the next generation? That's what we focus on here. At least that's what we focus on in this office. Everything that we look at to fund, it's making sure not just, is this valuable today? It's, what is the implication for funding it today that it is going to affect the generation and the generation after that? So it's talking with the mayor of a town to say, all right, how can we rebuild this bridge so your school buses can go to that school? But I want to know that that school is viable for generations, so that we don't just rebuild this bridge to a school that you're going to close next year, that investment is going to be there for generations. And that goes for so many different things. And that's Congress's job to do the appropriate thing there.
Awesome. Well, Congressman Sorensen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.